this amount of people coming out for the Lake Association meeting. So like I was introduced, my name is Wade Massure, the Rapids Area Fisheries Supervisor, and today I'm going to give you guys just kind of a general overview of what the fisheries is doing based on our last survey in 2019. So basically, the topics that we're going to kind of go over today, we're going to be looking at the fisheries surveys that have been done, kind of both past and present. I'm going to kind of give you a species update on individual species that people are actively targeting throughout the lake. And then I'll kind of go into walleye a little bit more and kind of what we do with stocking on the lake. So with our fisheries surveys, we typically conduct surveys every 5 years. That's just how we do our sampling typically. With lakes in our region, lakes are sampled every 5 to 10 years. And with the way that Long Lake is, the amount of pressure that it gets, it's on a rotation of every 5 years. So the next sampling event that will be happening on Long Lake will be in 2024. We have conducted, I think, 7 different standardized surveys on Long Lake, and that has been since 1959 to 2019. The other big thing in 2018 that happened, along with our standardized survey, there was a targeted survey, which that consists of an IBI survey. So just to kind of give you a little background on our surveys so our standardized surveys that we conduct every 5 years, our main things that we do are gill nets and trap nets. So gill nets, when you see them out there, will be big white tall buoys that are sticking out of the water, and they'll be spaced out about 250 feet apart. And so what that is that's marking the beginning and end of a gill net. Pretty much you don't have to worry about them. The only thing you have to worry about is hitting that white buoy that's out there if you do. But nets are typically 6 feet below the water. So boats won't get caught in them, props, nothing like that. The other thing that we have are trap nets. And trap nets those are set from the shore. There's a line that comes out and leads to a big box. And from that, there are hoops back in that. Fish, as they're swimming along the shore, they hit that line and they go into the box. And then they basically get trapped. And so that's how we sample fish out of our trap nets. The other big thing that we started doing was electrofishing. So we do spring electrofishing for bass on Long Lake. We have vegetation sampling and shoreline sampling. So with that, we go shoreline sampling. We look at, the amount of disturbed area. By disturbed, I mean that's areas that are documented as having housing on them compared to lots that don't have any houses on them. So just disturbed versus undisturbed. Targeted as needed, like I said, IBI sampling. That's one of the big things that gets done in IBI sampling. Where that's different from our standard surveys is IBI sampling goes and samples all the fish species out there, from the minnows up to the top predators. And they do different sampling. They do some trap nets, but then the majority of their sampling is seining and backpack electrofishing. So they're looking at a lot of smaller minnow species, kind of young eager fish, things like that. The other big thing that we do, that you'll see out here, I've got a picture down here. So these big red buoys, these are what are called vertical gill nets. And so the way that these work is there's 5 different nets that are here. You'll see 5 different poles on the surface. And so what those are is those gill nets go from the surface all the way to the very bottom point of the lake. And we set these in the deepest parts of the lake. So there's 2 different areas of the lake that we set these. And so what these do is, these nets do are, we are sampling basically the top of the water column to the very bottom point of the lake. And what we're looking at is yellow perch, walleye, and tulipy, or Cisco as some people call them. So we'll basically, with that, we'll get an idea of, walleye, tulipy, and yellow perch. We're looking at where they're at in the water column during that time of year and in what abundance they are. The thing that we have with the 5 different nets is they are also different mesh sizes. So we're able to sample, the very small fish up to the top predators, the bigger fish that are in there. So anything that comes and hits those, they're going to hit, we're going to catch them in our nets and we'll be able to sample. The other big thing that we do, so Park Rapids area, we are one of the only areas left in the state that does this. We actually go and do annual fish house count surveys. So what we do is we get together with a conservation officer and we do an annual flyover. So we'll either take up out of Bemidji and we'll fly down here. We have a specific flight path that we go and we hit all of our major lakes. And as we're doing that, we count the amount of ice houses out there. And so with that, we get an annual average that you can see here on top. And then we have a 5-year running average. And so what you can see with Long Lake, I mean, 2020 being a COVID year, it was very minimal ice houses that were out there, so not as much fishing pressure. But what we've seen in the last 2 recent years is the numbers are still on the lower side and somewhat declining. And for Long Lake, you can see our 5-year running average has kind of been on the decline. We're not seeing as many fish houses out there, so you're not getting as much pressure during the winter on fish species.
So is that like the permanent ice houses, or that include tents?
When we do our flyovers, that typically does everything that's out there. We take account on everything that's out there at that specific time, and our flights are typically trying to be done at the same time of the year, just to keep it standardized, to kind of get a better idea, line everything up with our data. But that also depends on the weather. I mean, if you get any sort of bad weather, the CO is going to call it off. That's not something that they want to fly on. We're looking for clear blue sky days to try and get out, which in the winter, who knows when those will come. So yeah, but no, it's good data, and like I said, we're one of the only areas left in the state that does this, and we find that it's really good data just to see, what the pressure is during the winter. So after that, we're going to go into the different species. The main species that we're going to be looking at today, we're going to go over black crappie, bluegill, largemouth bass, northern pike, rock bass, tule, walleye, and yellow perch. And so this is our most recent data from 2019. We got a pretty good group of crappie in there, and then we'll kind of go through everything else as we see it. So to start off with black crappie, the best way to sample these fish, at times it can be kind of hard to sample them, but the best gear that we have to sample those fish are gill nets. Like I said, it's spread out over that 250 feet. We have 15 gill nets that we use each year, or when we do our standardized samples, and those are set in areas that we are typically trying to target them. So we've got a fairly stable population. You can see since about 2004, the population has been increasing, which is a good thing. So your median size, your median length that you're going to get is about an 8-inch fish, but with that, in our 2019 sample, we had fairly good size quality. We have a lot of fish in the 10 to 11-inch range. So that's indicative of a very good population. It's a good, stable population. So that's a plus for you guys. The next species we have are bluegill. As most of you know that are out there, that go out fishing, there are a lot of bluegill out there. And as you can see, so in our graphs here that we have, the best way that we catch bluegill are with our trap nets. They are a very shallow fish. They like to be up on shore, and so they're going to hit that net, like I said, go into the trap. We're going to catch a lot of them. So this is combined data from all of our trap nets that we set. And so our catch per unit effort is how we measure our fish that we get. We are typically getting, in the last survey, we were getting about 40 bluegill per net that we were pulling up. And so that's a lot of fish that we're seeing. Your mean length, on the other hand, though, is fairly small. I mean, the majority of the population is just over 5 inches that we've been seeing. So that's one thing. We would like to see the size range get up a little bit bigger. So that would mean, maybe starting to harvest, if we can, some of those smaller fish. Because as you harvest more of those fish, it's going to give room for other fish to grow larger. So the next one that we're looking at are largemouth bass. So to target bass and to sample them correctly, that takes electrofishing. Not gill nets or trap nets. We don't really sample them well. Trap nets they'll typically avoid as we see them. So the best way to sample them is through electrofishing. So a lot of times, or if you were out on the lake in 2019 in spring, you may have seen a big boat out there that had a real loud noise coming off of it and had a bunch of bright lights. As we're going along the shoreline sampling for fish, we've got a generator that's going on back, and it'll basically light up an entire house on the shoreline. Because, bass predominantly, we're catching them it's at nighttime, and that's because during the day, when we're out electrofishing, bass will actively avoid us. Most fish species will actively avoid us. Bass, pike, walleye, those sight feeders, as they see a boat coming, will actively avoid the boat and go. So typically, a lot of times when you're electrofishing, you want to go at nighttime because they're not going to really see you coming as much, and so we'll get a lot better sample. So the first time that we actually sampled for bass in 2019, our catch rate that we had was just over 60 fish an hour, which is a very healthy population. A lot of your fish are in the 12 to 14 inch range, which is pretty good. As time goes on, you're going to see bigger fish that start growing into the population because there's a healthy, a decent forage base of minnows that those fish are actively feeding on. Bass, you're typically going to find them in those shallow basins, which are going to be the northern and southern basins of the lake. And a lot of times, Mud Lake that we have there that's just across the road, that's going to be a pretty good place for those fish to spawn out. So you've got a lot of area that is conducive to spawning for bass, and so you're going to have a pretty good population of bass going forward. The next fish species we have is northern pike. You have a very stable population of northern pike, which is a good thing. A lot of your fish are in that 24-inch range, so that's great. That's what we like to see. If you start getting below the 22 to 20-inch range, that's when we start getting concerned, just because you'll start getting a lot of those what we call hammer handle pike into the population, and those can actually, they can really wreak havoc on the other populations of fish that are in the lake. So where we're at right now with about 5 fish per lift on our gill nets, we are happy with that. It's great, and we want to try and keep it there. Next we're looking at rock bass. So rock bass are the other guys that you'll find, they like a little bit deeper water. They look like a big panfish. They're great table fare. They're one of my favorite fish to actually eat. Though with these fish, the good thing about them is they are excellent indicators of water quality and water clarity. So that is a plus. I mean, having those fish in the population and in their abundance means your guys' water quality and clarity on the lake is excellent, which is a good thing. It means you don't have to make pollutants, not any excess nutrients in there, so that's a good thing. These fish are fun to catch. They put up a pretty good fight. And like I said, they're very abundant. I mean, they're increasing in population a little bit from what we've seen in the previous sample in 2014, but they're still in good numbers where we like to see them. Next fish species we want to go over are tulipy. So these are a preferred food for walleye. These are they prefer cold water, cold and deep water. A lot of times with these fish, you're going to find them in the deepest points of the lake. They swim in schools, and they can be really fun to catch. Their population that we have seen since we started sampling and doing our standard samples has been on the increase. In 2019, we saw a huge bump in the population that was out there, which is a good thing. The one other thing, though, that we saw is the population jumped up to just over 12 inches. That means there's a lot of large adult fish out there. And so what that means is that's a lot of food for larger walleyes that are out there. They're not going to be something that younger, smaller walleyes are going to be eating. But in general, we're seeing an excellent size structure, so that's a plus to the lake. Yellow perch, one of our biggest concerns. They are probably the most preferred food for walleye, especially young walleye, younger and smaller walleyes. That is going to be their preferred forage base that they go after. The population that we see in Long Lake is definitely below what we would like to see it at. And the size quality in general for perch is, that mid to low quality. It's not something that people are going to be going out actively targeting, hoping to take home for table fare. And we can see that where, the mean length of the fish that we're seeing in our surveys are just over 7 inches. But the good thing that we did see from our gill net catch rates is, in 98, we had your highest year that we saw. It's kind of taken a dip, but since, 2019, 2014, and 2019, we're seeing an increased trend in the population. So what we're hoping in next year's standardized sample, we're hoping that we see an increase with this population, because I mean, that can only mean good things, especially throughout the state of Minnesota. Yellow perch are a big issue, not just in Long Lake, it is an issue statewide. They are in decline. The state in general is doing a ton of different research on yellow perch to see what is going on with this decline and how we can potentially solve that issue. And so the last species that we're going to cover here are walleye. The population is down. You can see that from our gillnet catch rate. So for the Long Lake Management Plan, what we call for in the most recent update that they put out, we want to try and get up to about 6 fish per lift. And right now we basically haven't seen that since about 2009. It's kind of been on a downward trend since then. A majority of these fish in the population are larger fish. And so that's something I'll get into a little bit further down in the presentation. So the only other thing with walleye is the population that you have in there, we really have minimal contribution to overall natural reproduction in Long Lake. And that's just because we don't have the correct spawning areas that are needed for that natural reproduction to occur. We don't have really the right type of sediments, windswept shores that we would need to have them spawn in specific areas. Right now, natural reproduction from fish that are in Long Lake, we estimate to be about 5% or less, so that's very low. So looking at some of the catch rate data, so with walleye, our young of year, which we call young of year, that's basically the fish that, are either hatched out right at the beginning of the year, from the spawning event, or those age 1 fish, which are, once they hit 1 year old. We don't really have a gear to sample those well. Electrofishing is about the best thing that we can do to sample those, but that also requires nighttime sampling. It's very intensive. Walleye, young of year walleye and age 1 walleye are they're very picky about where they want to be. And so trying to target those areas and find those areas throughout the lake can be pretty cumbersome. Take, for example, Beltane Lake. We were out there and trying to target the best areas to find them, and we honestly could not find any small young of year walleye, but we're seeing larger fish in that population, so we know that they're there. So as you can see, so this is an average from 1988 to 2019. As you can see, the age 1 walleye, we don't really see a lot in our sample. But as you go from age 2 to age 3, what we see is fish that we sample really kind of start to ramp up. About age 4 and age 5, it kind of starts to decline a little bit and simmer down. But in our samples that we see, year 5 through age 7 plus fish, we are seeing a lot of them. And so those age 7 plus fish, those are going to be your larger fish that you have in the population. A lot of those, eater-sized fish that people will catch, and most times throw back because they want to have those fish in the lake or to give someone else a chance to fish for them. Like I said, there's little decline in these fish, so they are staying in the population, and that's a large part of the biomass throughout the lake. So looking at stocking that we do in Long Lake, so our stocking that we do is based off littoral acres in statewide. That's how we kind of base everything on. Those littoral acres that we go off of is the area of the lake 15 feet or less. So with Long Lake, what you have, for a lake that's close to being about 2,000 acres, you only have 468 littoral acres. And so that's the area that those young viewers, small fish, are going to be using. Currently, we stock the Long Lake at about 1 pound per littoral acre. And typically, what that has come out to is about 485 pounds of fish that we stock in Long Lake. Those fish that we stock in there are true fingerlings. And what that means is typically with the state, when we raise walleye, we raise them out in ponds that are just throughout the county. And so that is all based off of, those fish will grow based off of what the food supply that's in there. So, we can get fish that grow real fast, and then we'll have a bunch of short fish that are in there. It all just depends on the year and the amount of food availability that's in there. The fish that we stock in Long Lake, the reason we call them true fingerlings is because those are fish that are purchased. We have a specific vendor that we go through, and we say the amount of fish that we want is, so a pound of true fingerlings is going to be about 15 to 25 fish. And we get those fish, and they have to be within a specific size. It's typically about 5 to 7 inches. And so if it's, say if they were to show up with a stocking truck, and those fish don't meet that requirement, we'll actually send those back and source those fish elsewhere to get to stocking those. Typically, that doesn't happen. Private hatcheries are very good about getting fish to a specific size, keeping them there. So that's a plus for us. So Long Lake has been in even number of years, and so we've been doing that since about 2016. From 2006 to 2014, we actually stocked at a rate of 2 pounds per littoral acre. The reason that was even started is that there was a legislation had gone through that mandated that all lakes throughout the state were stocked at a minimum of 2 pounds per littoral acre. And so after about 2014, there's data that we saw that was not, that what we were stocking previously to 2006, we were stocking at 1 pound per littoral acre. The data that we had seen, there was really no extra contribution from the 2 pounds per littoral acre to see continue doing that. So with that, after 2014, we went back, so starting in 2016, we went back to the 1 pound per littoral acre stocking regime. So looking at that, so here's some data that we have that we put together with the waste stock program that we do that basically takes all the data that we have from the lake and it throws it into a big program that we have, and it spits out numbers that, very difficult to get to, but this is what we have. So looking at these graphs right here, these gray triangles are our survey years that we have. Down here, it's a little bit hard to see. The way that it spits this out is these are annual. This goes off of annual. So right here, the 0.5 is what we would see as 1 pound per littoral acre because we're stocking every other year. So 1 pound over here would be 2 pounds per littoral acre, every other year. So what we're seeing with that is a negative trend where, stocking 1 pound per littoral acre, we're seeing higher returns and stronger year classes with that stocking regime than we were to have the 2 pounds per littoral acre. And with some of our math over here, that's what we came out with. So kind of just a general summary, your black crappie and pike are in stable condition. It's where we like to see them. You've got abundant bluegill, largemouth bass, and rock bass. You've got an increasing population of tulipy. So with that, that means, our walleye population that we have is stable. But the thing about that is it's a large proportion of big fish. So with that, the next thing that we have, we've got a low population of yellow perch. That's something that we want to try and change. Like I said, there's research being done into that, and so that's an ever-changing thing, and hopefully we can get some answers to that. Our next standard survey will be 2024, and with that, in that survey, that will be our final year of assessing this 1 pound per littoral acre stocking regime. So once we do that sample, we're going to go through and look at all the data that we have, and if there's something that we don't like or something that we would like to change, and that's something, talking with you guys, we're talking with Charlie a bunch, after we do that standardized sample, if that's something that we want to change, we will look into changing that. Like I said, we're working with you guys. You guys live on the lake, you have a big stake in the lake. So, it's something we want to balance everything back and forth between you guys. One thing that we had mentioned before, something to potentially try, and this is just something to think about. Back in the mid to late 80s, they had tried fry stocking. And so where fry stocking is different from fingerling stocking, like I said, fingerlings are those fish that are 5 to 7 inches. You know, they're about the size of your finger. Where that is compared to fry stocking is fry is basically, after we hatch out the fry in our hatchery here, down here at the Park Rapids office, once all of our walleye fry hatch out, they go into a giant tank, and lakes that are stocked with fry, we ship those fry out. And so fry stocking that was done back in the 80s, we didn't see great returns from that, but that is also very old data. And so, you know, with Long Lake, with it having clear water now, and you know, good water quality, it may be something that we may consider trying. I've got data from other lakes in other areas, because I've actually reached out to a couple of other area supervisors, just inquiring about this, just because, you know, it's something that I thought maybe something we could look into. One lake that is fairly similar, that I just want to bring up here, is over in the Walker area, Woman Lake, where they had seen with their fry stockings, they were stocking all over the board. And then within, the past, I want to say 4 different stockings that they've done there, they stocked at 500 fish per total acre for fry. And what they have seen is just a massive raise in return of fish that come back. And that's compared to, they were stocking all over the board. They were stocking up to, I think it was close to 2,000 fry per littoral acre, down to, you know, 100 fry per littoral acre. And so they found that sweet spot, and it's fish have just gone crazy, and the population is moving there. So that's something that we could look into, but then there's also other possibilities that we could look into. So that's something we want to keep in touch with you guys. You know, and like I said, our standard survey is in 2024. So after we get that done, that's something I'm going to touch base with you guys with, and we'll go over the data. You know, we'll kind of talk about it, see where we're at, and we're going to go from there. And so with that, that's the end of my presentation. If you guys have any questions, feel free to answer them. And if not, you can catch me in the back. I'll be sticking around in the back for a while the business meeting goes on, and we can chat about some more stuff.
I have 2 questions. Question 1, what does a pound of fingerling walleye cost these days?
So we actually looked that up, and I think it's between, well, everything's changing prices, they're constantly going. With private hatcheries, a lot of them are going away. So one thing with the private hatcheries that are out there, different aquaculture areas, the general population that are raising these fish they're in the decline. And a lot of younger folks are not wanting to get into the business of doing it. And so we're getting less and less private hatcheries. One of our favorite private hatcheries, Bill Gaten, he's going to stop stocking in general. It's too labor intensive for him. He just doesn't want to do it anymore. So our most recent that we got, I think a pound, I want to say it was somewhere in the $25 to $27 range. So that comes out, it's a little over $1 per fish. It was about $1.50, $2.75 per fish that it's going at now.
And then second question, so with the discovery of zebra mussels in the lake, has that changed anything from how fisheries is planning on managing the lake?
Yes and no. The zebra's coming into the lake when they clean up. That's definitely going to alter how fish, where they end up in the lake. Why? I mean, one of the biggest that I can go on an example that I can go with is Big Sand Lake. I've just recently done a talk there. We're actually getting ready to remove the regulations there and go back to statewide. But with Big Sand, they had, I forget what year it's right at the top of my head, but I mean, their water clarity jumped close to 15 feet. And so that's a huge jump. And so typically, you know, walleye, where their previous areas that they would have inhabited, or, you know, that they would have visited, or areas where you would have found them, tried to fish with them, they're now going to be in completely different areas, because that's going to be a huge shift in where their prey availability is and where they're going to inhabit. So it may change how we sample for some species, but that's also That's a very fluid situation with that. There's a big study that's being done that involves walleye and zebra mussels that some of our state researchers are doing. And so that data is actually going to be coming out very soon. And so once we do see a lot more of that data that we get from them, it's going to be basically kind of basing stuff off that and going from there.
How do you calculate the age of a walleye? Do they have rings like trees?
Exactly. So with walleye, we take otolith. So basically, what an otolith is otolith is like an ear bone. It's something. It's what I did my master's on. So it's an ear bone that you find inside their skull. And so when you take that out, there are several different methods of counting the rings on an otolith. You can crack them, look at them under a microscope. You can take what's called an isotope saw. They have diamond blades. It cuts basically wafer thin sections out of these. Look at it under a microscope, and you can basically see every year of growth that that fish had. And so they have yearly annuli, just like tree rings. And you can actually see kind of the summer to winter difference. You'll see the summer where they'll have excellent growth. They'll have, it'll really jump out at you, and then as winter hits, you'll see that growth will really slow down, and then typically at the beginning of the year, they'll form an annulus around it. That's our best way to get aging data for that. But we also do take scales and spines. And so with that, scales are they're a less accurate way of getting it, but it's still accurate, but less accurate. It's probably your next step down from otoliths. The thing with scales, the scales are very good at aging young fish. Once you get up to fish that are in the 8 to 9 to 10 plus age range, you're going to get what you'll get is, they're called false annuli. If a fish gets stressed out or anything like that, they can throw down a false ring. And that can be very typical in scales. But like I said, very good at aging young fish. The next thing that we do is we will take spines. And so the dorsal spines that you see, the super spiny looking ones on the top of the fish, the very first three, we'll take a pair of clippers and we'll basically just clip them off right at the base. And what you can do, it's typically just like an otolith as well. You can take a thin section of it, you'll get readings like that. Same thing, annulus that are formed. Yeah?
I know there's multiple factors that come into this whole thing. It's not like you can just look at one thing. But it seems kind of counterintuitive to think that cutting from 2 pounds to 1 pound per literal acre will actually have more effectiveness, Is there a reason it doesn't make sense to me?
So we've had a bunch of talks with Charlie about this, and one of the easiest ways that we kind of tried to explain it with what we did, because we're basing this off of littoral acres. That's where your fish are going to be actively feeding. That's, you have 465 littoral acres. So that's why it's based off that. The best way that we can just kind of explain it just right off the bat instead of going into crazy scientific terms. Think of it as a farmer has 500 acres. And, he goes to plant his crops out there. And typically he plants 1,000 rows of corn. And that has gotten his optimum yield. Well, say he wants to try and double his yield. And so he goes out and does 2,000 rows of corn. A lot of times what you're going to see with that is those rows of corn are too close together. You're going to get less optimum yield. You're going to be, those plants are going to be fighting for the amount of resources that are in there. So basically, we're just trying to find the best balance.
But we're certainly not overpopulated with walleyes, according to
Yes, it's not
survey. So
overpopulated,
it
but
looks like there should be, it's more like planting more acres rather than putting the rows closer together.
And so one of the other things with the walleye population, like I said, the biomass that's in there are very large fish. That was something that we had talked about with the Wade Association, where fish had talked about, or people had talked about, a lot of people don't want to take those bigger fish out of the system. And so that's one thing that we actually saw in Big Sand, where they had an overabundance of those large adult fish. And so they were getting less and less contribution to overall production, like natural reproduction. And so with removing those fish, we're actually seeing a bump. So what it is it's allowing, you have those large fish in there. That's a large amount of biomass. They're eating a lot of food. So removing, occasionally removing some of those fish, you're allowing smaller fish that typically aren't going to get as big or, may not survive, are going to be able to move up into those positions. The other thing that I can say about the biomass is there's only so much forage in the lake. And from what we've seen, the optimal amount of fish is that 1 pound per littoral acre. What we've seen when we did stock 2 pounds per littoral acre, what we saw is there was really no difference in the return on what we were getting. So basically what that means is we were throwing an extra pound of fish in there because they're fighting for resources. That extra pound wasn't doing anything. Most of the times those fish were likely just dying just because of competition between fish and there's just not enough forage for them to actually go after.
I think what we should do now, and we need to take a break.
Wrap it up and I'll be in the back. So.
Yeah, we'll be outside if you have any questions.
Yeah.
Wade, can I make one point though? You and I have had this, and I just want the general group to hear it too.
Yeah.
Your survey shows that the putting 1 pound and 2 pound, the difference where we're not getting the growth.
Yep.
Your survey has nothing to do with people's catch rates.
No.
So that's the argument we've had ongoing is the anglers feel that we caught more walleye when we were stocking 2 pounds. Their data on the surveys doesn't correlate to that. So that's been the crux of, we're getting along, but that's been the crux of the argument.
That's the crux of our back and forth argument.
So that's still a point to be debated
Yep.
in the future.
Yep. All right.
I got one last question.
Yeah.
If you had 2 pounds and one it increases, but 2 it decreased, why not do 1 pound every 2 years instead of 5 years? That would give me
No, so we're doing-
they might keep inclining.
Are you saying that, so we stock,
Yeah, like when we went 2 pounds that year, it declined. But every time you put 1 pound in, it seems to increase. But we over flooded it with 2 pounds, so go, instead of 5 years, put 1 pound in every 2 years or 3 years.
well, that's what we're doing. We stock every other year on years. Yep, it's not every 5 years. 5 years is just our sample.
Oh, all right.
That's just the sample. We stock every other year on even number of years. And so that's, with our lakes throughout the area, it does vary. So like you guys are stocked on even years. Other lakes throughout the area can be stocked on odd years. Just because we don't have the resources, we can't produce the amount of fish as a state to supply all the lakes in 1 year. So that's why it's staggered. Yeah, I can go into a little bit more detail about that if you want to talk about it later in the back. But yeah.
Great, thank you.